Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I am joined today once again by my good friend, retired Master Sergeant John Keene. You are the NFA, the machine gun and other fancy fun gun expert for the Morphy Auction Company, right?
I am the specialist with Morphy's that specializes in National Firearms Act guns, all those fun things.
So, I put out a request to the fantastic folks on Patreon who make Forgotten Weapons possible every day for what questions should we ask Mr. Keene specifically about machine guns and machine gun collecting. So, we are going to prompt more honest answers from Mr. Keene by giving him a glass of Lafroig.
My answers are always honest. I just might say a little more than might be
Wise?
Maybe. Maybe. Well, thank you, Ian.
Lunch it. These are not Glencairns because I'm in a hotel room and this is what I had available. So, let's get right into it.
Sure.
Our first question comes from George, who says, I would be interested in both of your opinions of which machine gun or guns are over or undervalued by American collectors due to war provenance, nation of origin, or connection to specific historical events. So, not because of shootability,
Right.
but because of their historical ambiance, I guess. What are overvalued and what are undervalued, do you think?
Well, I'm gonna start by saying this. Any collectible or collectible area has ebbs and flows, like the tide. Sometimes things get hot, and you get a lot of collectors say, "Oh boy, I want to get that," and they look out for the fine specimens, and then a certain number will get what they are going to get, and they're satisfied, and they move on to something else. And so some things will be worth more and less depending on that. That said, there are a few that are pretty consistently always doing well. I think a very good phrase was, and I'll tell you what the specific model was. I was having a conversation about MG42s because that has been a hot gun, but it did have a little ebb and flow. But the MG42s pretty much trade at the level of fine automobiles.
That's a really good analogy, they do.
And that has been the way it has been since the rise in the American machine gun collecting market.
Okay.
I'm fortunate, and I know people who go back quite a long ways, back when, and this is maybe again a little bit, when the veterans are first bringing those guns back, they were just souvenirs. They were not worth a whole lot of money. They didn't cost the veterans anything in terms of a scratching you put in your money. And the ammunition was often not really available, especially the German World War II guns. If you didn't bag the ammunition when you bagged the gun, it was tough to get.
Right, there wasn't a lot of 8mm Mausers sitting on the shelf of
There was not.
your local bait and tackle shop.
My own grandfather had that experience. He brought something back and didn't have any ammunition for years and years and years and years and years because it wasn't.
I had a similar experience. I got a vet bring back P38, and the magazines were still loaded, and they were loaded with cartridges that he had made on a lathe from 38 Special.
Wow.
So they're 9mm cases, but the head stamp was 38 Special because he couldn't find 9mm.
You had to turn the rims down.
40s.
And I got two little segues that might be of interest. I also, 40 years ago, purchased a P38. It was a spraywork Berlin CYQ gun, and it had ammunition, original World War II German ammunition, in the magazine in the holster that came with it. That was an interesting find.
Yeah.
And I said, wow, that was cool. And the person I bought it from, who was born in 1942, said to me, "Yeah, that's been around the house for as long as I can remember."
I believe it.
But turning things with lathes and making ammunition, yeah, I've talked to people who've done that. When gun collecting really gave its rise, at first, there wasn't a lot of money being paid out for like a G41. Now that's a highly sought after German World War II collectible gun today. A very good friend of mine, he traded a Harrington Richardson .22 revolver for a G41. And the person who got the revolver thought he had a great deal. He got something he could actually take and use.
Right.
Whereas the guy who got the G41,
What's he going to do with it?
what are you going to do with that? You can't hunt with it. Ammunition is hard to get.
Dolph Goldsmith told me there was a time when he wouldn't pay more than $25 for any machine gun, because that's all they were worth.
I've had that conversation with Dolph as well. So to get back to the one at hand, the really substantive answer is what is considered an overvalued or undervalued machine gun. I'm going to say this.
You have to be really diplomatic about telling your own client base what they're paying too much for, in your opinion.
Well, I have a very good answer for it, and it's not getting out of it either. It's saying the value of what someone's willing to pay at the gun, especially at auction, it's whatever you decide is. I get a lot of questions with people saying, what's it worth? What do you think it's going to bring? Some of the very astute collectors really want to know what it's going to bring, and then they gauge their pocketbook and their budget about how far they want to reach for it. I'm going to say something that the person who said this to me years ago, I hope he sees this and chuckles. You never pay too much for a gun if you really want it.
This is true.
If you think about it, they are luxury items. Somebody might find them to be investments. That's another question. But they really are a luxury item, and you buy them because they resonate with you, or because you are speculating, thinking you're going to put your money in a good place where you can get your money out of it at some later date. But I've been in a position working with the auction companies, and I can really say this: we are only temporary custodians.
This is very true.
Of our respective collections. What's overvalued? In the machine gun genre, it's pretty hard to pick out something that I would say is overvalued.
I have a strong opinion on the subject that is unfettered by any obligation to a client base. I think German guns are largely overvalued. I think Lugers are overvalued. I think Mausers are overvalued. I think 42s and 34s are overvalued. I think MP40s are overvalued. I think FG42s are massively overvalued. And it's for exactly the reason that George was asking here. It is because of their association with World War II Germany. I think there's a huge interest, an oversized interest in specifically German guns. I think the American collecting market has this view of World War II Germany as really, they were technologically advanced. It's a combination of both respect for what was seen as a very skilled military, combined with the sort of we won, and we get the spoils of war, which is all their cool loot. I think you put those two together and you get a tremendously inflated interest in German guns specifically.
There is a great competition for the specialized, and especially the high condition specialized specimens of the German firearms. And then you say Lugers, machine guns, and all of that stuff. And I agree. When you have competition for a limited number of units, that's exactly what it is. And we in the auction company business, as long as we represent things honestly, accurately, our consigning clients like it, and our buyer clients don't mind either,
right?
Because they're able to get the thing, and there is a tremendous level of passion for those. But I will say, I have watched Lugers go up and back down,
yes,
and go up and go back down. I've watched that fluctuate. And I agree that relative to what they do, as far as you put a magazine in a machine gun and you shoot bullets rapidly downrange, I think the German guns command a higher price generally than the counterparts in a whole bunch, and almost all the other genres, because there's a very large level of interest in it. It resonates with a lot of people. And they appeal to the collector in a way that They have enough variety of manufacturers, enough
That's
variety
true.
of proof marks, date codes,
Yep.
evolution of features, yet they're very high quality manufacture, fit and finish, and function.
And they show up in lots of popular media. There's tons of movies about World War II and fighting Hitler.
That's right.
And people like what they are familiar with.
I-
So second half of this question is what's undervalued? And I think we actually talked, I know we talked about this, I can't remember if it was on camera or not, but a couple of years ago we talked about this, and you were of the opinion that like the interwar submachine guns, things like the Steyr MP34s, the EMPs, the Bergmann MP35s were an undervalued, like really cool guns that were way below what they ought to bring for their quality and their interest and their scarcity. And apparently you were right, because they've like doubled and tripled in value in the last 5 years, and they're no longer so much underappreciated. Those guns are sitting in like the 20,000 range.
20, even 30.
Like,
And we had that conversation, and I believe we may have had it on camera, but if people paid attention to that and they went out and got those, when they got those, they're very happy today. I've had several clients. In fact, I've had several clients tell me and come back to me and say, I'm really glad you pushed me to get that gun when you did. At first I was a little unsure of whether I was going to focus and get that, but I'm really, really glad I've got it now. And it might be, and there are several different, it might be because they enjoy shooting it. It might be because they realize that it does have a historical place in their collection, or it may be that, wow, I bought that Irma EMP for $8,000, and then you sold one recently for $36,000. I'm really glad I listened to you, Mr. Keene.
So
Kind of a thing.
all machine guns have gone up. All guns have gone up. We're seeing an inflation in collectible prices across the board. Is there anything right now that you would identify as an undervalued segment of the machine gun market? Because frankly, I'm thinking about it and I can't really come up with one.
I will tell you where it is. This may work against me personally because I've capitalized over and over.
Have another drink.
On this. I will do that. And there are those who are astute. If you know or have the parts, and you can find yourself a deactivated or a non-working machine gun. Let's say somebody has a wonderful parts kit to your one of the Hotchkiss guns, and then they come across a gun that's a deactivated gun, but it is a registered gun, and
right.
the registered receiver and so forth is appropriately there. If you've got a good parts kit, say for a model 1914 Hotchkiss, that registered receiver is a DEWAT, Deactivated War Trophy gun, registered deactivated gun, is worth more to you than
That's
it would
true.
be to somebody else who is saying, boy, where am I going to get that part? Where am I going to get this part? And for years it's been that way, but in recent years, and this is something interesting, with the advent of the internet and the availability of those parts through the internet, it's one of the things that you've seen the parts for machine guns just go astronomically expensive recently. And it is partially due to the people who are anticipating the surfacing of deactivated war trophies, because think about where we are, when we are, and the age group that is passing away or no longer interested, and their children and grandchildren are no longer interested.
Right.
So you're seeing these things surface now. And so there are either it be a speculator who's saying, boy, I'm going to need those parts. I hope to need those parts someday. They're willing to reach and dig a little deep. Combined with, and this is something I'll pass on to my father, who said to me many years ago when I was a teenager, real value is not in the paper money that you have in your pocket, or even the money you have in your bank account in terms of numbers. It's the goods that you can hold in your hand, and durable goods, and you can barter to trade with somebody.
That is definitely true. I've found a lot of situations where an advanced collector has some really cool stuff that I would love to have, and maybe it's a duplicate of theirs, but often it's not. They are not willing to sell it. because they're not interested in getting the money for it. They're at a position where
The money won't change their lives.
Right, they don't necessarily have to be wealthy, but they don't need the money for anything specific, and they know that it's a lot easier to find the money than it is to find whatever that really rare thing is. And so if you've got something equally interesting, a trade can often be arranged in a place where you couldn't buy something for cash.
And something
So, this is going to be a long Q&A at this rate.
Yes.
We have a second question that is very similar to the first. This is from Verda. It says, are there any categories or types of machine guns that you think are underrated or overrated by the NFA community compared to how well they actually shoot or function? For example, Japanese machine guns work better than they're given credit for. German submachine guns are more finicky than people expect. Is there a what sort of misconceptions are out there, good or bad?
There's a couple of pretty accurate conceptions out there that I've found, and that is that MG34s tend to be problematic.
I was going to bring that one up if you didn't.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because the relatively small number of matching original guns, due to the nature in which the guns came into the American registered public, to be able to have, the registered guns out there are a very small percentage of the actual number. The matching guns are a very small percentage of the actual registered MG34s out there. And because of that, and because people say, oh boy, I want an MG34, and they buy that MG34, so often it's bought by somebody who wants it. It's a wonderful milled steel machine gun. It is a German gun. It's well made. It's got a good fit. It's got a good finish. However, the Germans fitted them, and they ran well.
That is not a universally parts interchangeable gun.
No.
You'd think it would be by the 1930s. Like, we were doing that in the 1830s. 100 years later, MG34 is not an interchangeable parts gun.
They were built to run with the guns that were fitted to them. Remember, they were supplied with multiple bolts, multiple barrels, and a Waffenmeister was there to support it.
Yeah.
And they ran well, and they were very, very effective guns. But in the American market, the guns that were imported years ago, they were disassembled, and all the receivers put over here in this big box, all the shrouds in that big box, and all the bolts in this box. And when somebody wanted a part, they'd pull out a part and they'd chip it off. If somebody wanted a complete gun, they'd go to each box, pull one out, put it together, ship out the gun, and they weren't fitted. Now, a lot of those guns are out there, and they take them to the range, and I've heard a good phrase, it mostly runs well.
Yeah, exactly. I had a friend who got a 34 and knew what was going on, and he had like 7 bolts and 5 or 6 barrels, and he planned an entire range day of just, I'm going to go out, and I'm going to start with barrel 1, and I'm going to put in all the bolts until I find one, I'm just going to go through all the combinations until I find a set that works.
I did
and
that.
then mark them religiously.
I did that years ago, and I got one that ran very well in the gun that I had at the time. And I got one, and I sent out to somebody who was very, very good armorer. And he timed the 308 barrel bolt and the 308 conversion, which was a Browning barrel with an MG34 collar that had been turned down appropriately, and the gun runs and runs and runs. And
So is there anything out there that you think that people underappreciate functionally? Stuff that people think isn't going to run, but actually are very reliable.
Let me think about that for a moment. There are a lot of I think the Smith & Wesson Model 76 submachine gun, I'm really happy and impressed with the way that gun, they always run. Okay. They're always comfortable at the range. It's one of the great entry-level machine guns, in my opinion. As far as guns that people don't think are going to run and then run well, Japanese Type 11.
Okay.
People think, oh, that's not going to run well. That complex hopper feed system and so forth.
Can't possibly work.
I
You've spoiled it, by the way. I want one of those.
Well,
now I'm not going to be able to get
Well,
one. Thank you.
they're scarce enough, and you will be able to get one. I'll find you one. But I provided the sounds to the Battlefield 5 Pacific expansion.
Right.
And I brought that gun, that 11 out, and after the film crew who observed that, one of them said, "Wow, I really like that," because the thing ran in no trouble whatsoever. But what it really is, if you know the gun, lubricate it properly,
That always
like you
helps.
should, when appropriate, lubricate the ammunition. Will run fine.
Okay.
But people, there are guns people expect to run well and they don't. And I don't know how many times that I have encountered a machine gun that could be bought for a relatively reasonable price. And once it's bought, the person says, "Hey, this doesn't run well." And I said, "That's probably why you were able to buy it."
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So I guess I'll say, give everybody this recommendation. If you're willing to do your research and put in the effort and the time and do the trial and error like your person you spoke to had the MG34, if you can, do that, do a little bit of fitting, or know the right people to send the gun out to, you can have a machine gun that, or several of them, that just run always well and people are happy at the range and you can bring your friends out and do that. So.
Our next question is from Will, who says, of all the wacky machine guns you've seen, which takes the cake for being labeled a machine gun only for legal reasons? Like, what sort of thing really shouldn't be registered as a machine gun, or be considered a machine gun, but is?
I think that the Japanese trainer machine gun is a great example of that.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
And that gun, if you put a regular full-size round in it, you are going to blow the bolt out the back of the gun. You'll get one round out of it and probably injure yourself in the process. If you have a machine gun for which the ammunition for said machine gun is not commercially available, in my opinion, it should be submitted to the BATF Tech Branch for removal from the provisions of the National Firearms Act.
They've been quite happy to do that with things like destructive devices.
There are ones that they've done that too, and they've said, yeah, well, the Maxim 1 pounder pom-pom gun, for example. What are you going to do with that? There are some others out there that I think they should be removed. The 55 Boys anti-tank rifle, there's a good example.
Absolutely.
The Jap trainer in 6.5 paper mache, hardened paper mache bullet. I don't know where I can buy that in commercial channels.
Yeah.
No, right. That's one. That's one that I would say is definitely there.
All right. Paladin says, are deactivated war trophies worth the risk that at some point in their past, the owner missed filing some of the paperwork you would need to be able to legally reactivate them?
This is very straightforward. The gun is either registered or it's not. If it is registered as a deactivated war trophy, that's it. There was nothing else somebody had to do in, say, 1947 or somewhere back in the day, other than send the IRS form in,
Right.
and it's registered. Once it's registered and it's registered as deactivated, that's it. If you've got it or somebody else has it and it's registered as a deactivated machine gun, there's no question. Under the current laws of administration, you could submit to reactivate it.
Right.
And they're not going to say, well, somebody didn't file this back in 1956.
Yeah.
That's not.
I put that in as a softball question because
Sure.
I didn't realize that was a question. Apparently it is, and so we can clear that one up very easily. Next question is from Zane. It says, what would each of you consider to be the best and worst submachine gun from the Cold War era as a collector? So collecting, shooting, maintenance. So not specifically for its historical context, but for collecting and using. So post-World War II.
Post-World War II, some of the best, well, the best is, there's some good, and you're saying specifically a submachine gun.
Specifically submachine.
I would say a Carl Gustaf Model 45 or Swedish K would be at the top, near the top, at or near the top of my list as far as a subgun.
That figures. You already pointed out the Smith 76 is a really good one, so it would naturally follow that you'd really like the Swedish K.
And I'm not the only one. Talked to some Vietnam War veterans who had encountered them or with the hands of some of our brethren in that conflict, or Korea for that matter. Pretty darn effective machine gun. I've shot them. They're great subgun for that in that genre. As far as poor subguns in the post-war era, you've shot a few of those, or attempted to shoot a few of those.
This is true. The PM63 always tops my list for really unpleasant, unfortunate, undesirable submachine guns. That thing's just, ugh.
The other one, which I'll put in kind of a category, there are guns that were produced in an original caliber, like 7.62 by 25 Russian Tokarev, and then they've been converted into a more common round, like say 9mm Parabellum, and they don't work so well in that way, or they're finicky because, and it's usually because the magazines is what it is. But that doesn't really fit in the parameters of the question.
Another good one, I think, would probably be something like the Yugo M56.
Absolutely.
It's just so ugly. I don't know that I could consider it for any reason other than it's just so ugly.
This is going to segue into something that's new. You go ahead and finish it. I'll go on
it's
next thing.
unpleasant to shoot. It's got a lot of the worst aspects of submachine gun design. It's got a terrible MP40 style folding stock. The gun's way longer than it should be for what's actually mechanically being done. The magazines, I think we can actually get the magazines now, but it's its own proprietary magazine. It has a tendency in service to accidentally disassemble itself and run away while you're shooting it, which is not a good thing.
I've had that happen to me.
Ooh, exciting.
But it's exciting and disconcerting. One of the things that, where were they going to go with this? Subguns that don't work, and it's not through the fault of the design. But one of the things that I have really noted is over time, the commercial ammunition supply industry has decreased the loadings of the cartridges. One of the best examples of this is the 8mm Japanese Nambu.
I figured you might be going there. Yeah, that's a good one.
They have loaded down those Nambu cartridges, and they went from having these really good rounds. If you can find the ones made by Old Western Scrounger or Federal Cartridge, they have that 102 grain bullet with the right ogive and the right powder length. They run flawlessly fine through the Type 100 and the Type 14 pistols and the Type 94s, and they work really great. But if you go in now and try to buy what's available in the commercial market, they're effete. They don't function the actions well enough. I have to pull the bullets, reload them with an appropriate charge of powder, and in order for them to function as they should.
There's a collective assumption that Japanese pistols are fragile, and thus there's a liability in having proper ammunition for them. So the company's loaded down the ammunition to the point that it doesn't really reliably cycle the guns anymore.
And not without not with unfounded reason. The Japanese had they could do so many things really, really well, but one of the things they really didn't get right was springs. Mm-hmm. And the springs that are made by Japan, one of the first things you want to do if you're going to have a Japanese Type 14 or 94 and you want to take it out and you shoot it, you order up a new set of springs from Wolf or somewhere else, take the original springs out, put it in a Ziploc bag, label it as original, whatever from the model of the gun is, put the springs and Wolf in, shoot them with that, and when you want to make the gun all original, put the original spring back in. That's the thing. That's the thing to pull about doing. Okay. And because otherwise they, a lesser charged cartridge for the spring that is getting less ginger.
Yeah, which is fine until you try and put it in your properly reconditioned Type 14, right. And it either doesn't run or it's just that right level of weakness that the gun runs away on you because it won't fully cycle.
Right.
Oops, that's unfortunate. Ryan says, when do you think the demand curve for transferable machine guns will flatten out and perhaps start to decline?
When we stop making as many babies, maybe. As long as there are human beings who have an
Look,
interest.
a flying pig out the window.
Right. As long human beings will always be born who will have that collector gene in them.
Mm-hmm.
And there will always be, especially for machine guns. Machine guns, even if you weren't making films that show that and make that exciting, there's something really fun about taking a Browning automatic rifle to the range and shooting it. Even if you have a guy and you say, oh, here's a Civil War musket, and they can go out and shoot it. Wow, that's kind of neat. That's how a Civil War musket works. But if they don't have a touchstone to that era, they're not going to be interested in acquiring a Civil War musket. But take somebody who's never had anything to do with firearms or done anything with firearms. They win the Rotary Club charity auction, where my father and I have donated a day of machine gun shooting, and they've never done anything with guns. They'd go out there, and I put an MP40 in their hands or a BAR in their hands, and they chuckle and smile and enjoy that. As long as people are being born who do that, there'll be an interest and a desire for those guns, and the number of machine guns of registered transferable machine is diminishing all the time, and the interest is not diminishing. So will it flatten out? Probably not.
The only conceivable way it would flatten or decrease is if the legal barriers to purchase are significantly increased. If transferable somehow no longer becomes transferable, then the price will go down.
Pay a little attention to what's happened in Canada.
Yeah.
That one. There are machine guns in Canada. There are registered private owners in Canada who can own machine guns, but the number of those registered private owners is diminishing every year.
Right. They didn't confiscate them. They just said you can't transfer them to people who don't have the permit, and we're no longer issuing the permits. So if you have them, you can keep them.
Yeah.
But they're playing the long game, and when all those people die, those guns will get
all those machine guns up in Canada will eventually be in the hands only of legal entities that are licensed, such as movie supply houses and things like that. And you're already seeing it occur.
Yeah.
You're already seeing it occur.
Alex says, for destructive devices, artillery, how do owners reload cannon shells? Is load data passed down from owner to owner? Is black powder the common propellant? Or is there smokeless powder out there that's available to consumers that's suitable for cannons?
The artillery and a large caliber cannon collector shooter, that is a brotherhood. If the people who are in the National Firearms Machine Gun community are small and kind of a brotherhood, and believe me, it's small. If you wreck your reputation in this genre, people know it.
Yeah.
And that shoot the big cannon, that's an even smaller subgenre within the genre, but they're really a good bunch, and they are very helpful to each other. And you could buy, surplus military powder and use it to load, and people exchange load data and projectiles, and where can I find projectiles? Where can I have molds made to cast the projectiles I need? That's pretty much the way it is.
So if you're going to get into artillery, plan to get into this essentially social group. You're going to need to get to know the people who have been shooting artillery for a long time, because they're the ones who have the expertise. They can help you source components, source knowledge and information, and learn how to run your guns. And then
they're really a great bunch of guys. I really, really cannot say enough good things about the ones that I've come in contact with. There are some initials like, BB and FH and some others that I won't disclose their names on this camera. But if you want to get into cannons and shooting big artillery, contact me. I'll be happy to refer you to the right person.
they'll put you in touch with people who are commonly known by names like Dangerous.
Yeah. They're great people.
And once you get doing that, 20 or 30 years down the road, you become the person that
right.
the new owners come to learn how to safely do all this.
That's right.
A different Alex says, of the entire pool of machine guns that can be bought, where would you recommend someone getting started in machine gun collecting?
Of the pool of machine guns that can be bought,
Everything out there. I mean,
if
everything is out there
okay.
available.
This is a great question. I'm enjoying answering it. Get started in a pool, in an area that you have a touchstone with. If you have an ancestor who was in World War II and carried a BAR, you might want to find a Browning automatic rifle and start with that. If you had somebody who was in the Pacific Theater, a friend of mine's father was, he started out with an 03A3 because that's what his father had in the Pacific Theater. And then he said, well, what did the Japs have? Well, a Type 99 rifle or a Type 96 light machine gun or something like that. Find something that resonates with you. If it's not, you don't have anything like that, you don't have a touchstone, then you want to start in something. This is what I really recommend you do. Go to one of the big shooting events where there are machine guns being shot, and if you have to pay for it, buy a pass which allows you to shoot on the line, and ask if you can try some different guns on the line, and then pick out the one you like.
And there are places like Machine Gun Vegas that offer the same thing where you don't have to find a specific event. There are ranges that cater specifically to machine guns, and there are a couple of them that have really good inventories where you can try out a lot of pretty exotic stuff.
But if you want, yeah.
And exactly like you say, try it. Find out what you actually enjoy.
Right. Or send a message to Ian, or send a message to me. But I'll tell you, if you want to start with an entry-level machine gun, many times I get asked, what's a good entry-level machine gun? And P40 is a fine entry-level machine gun as a registered tube gun because you don't have to pay a huge amount of money. You get a really good gun, slow firing, controllable, spare parts are around, ammunition is more or less readily available. It's a great thing to start out with. It's a 76. I've said it's really fine. I had somebody who had never done anything with machine guns, had a few guns. He accepted an invitation to go to the range with me one day, and he shot the Smith & Wesson 76. He said, I really like this. And there are others, out there like that too. But try different ones out.
And it may be, if you're a mechanical nerd, you don't have a specific ancestor, who was in the military.
Touchstone or something.
Yeah. But it may be something like a Maxim gun or a Vickers gun.
Oh.
If you really enjoy the mechanical finesse and complexity, and you want a gun that's going to require some tinkering on the range, if it's about making a complex machine work instead of just putting bullets downrange, you may be very, very happy with something like an older Maxim gun, and those aren't necessarily more expensive.
And I'm going to refer you right back to one of our early questions. If there was an area where I think that there's undervalued machine guns out there, it's in the water-cooled machine gun models. Those are fun guns to shoot. They run. You have to put in a little effort.
They take patience.
You have to have some patience, and you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to read. But once you get it and you can make them run, you can convert them into calibers. You can load them heavier or lighter and adjust the fusee spring tension on the Maxim and the Vickers guns. You can the Browning guns, always great because the parts abound. They almost always run well, and ammunition is available. I think that if there was an undervalued machine gun model or type out there, I think the water-cooled guns would be where they are.
Logan says, what is your opinion of the Mac family and the recent surge of aftermarket accessories? Is this going to drive prices up even faster for those?
Already has. They've more or less doubled from what they were. The available those accessory kits that are made, they're high quality, and they make those guns equal to their much more expensive brethren on the range. And Mac went from being kind of the poor stepchild entry-level gun, and I can remember saying, "Oh, you should get into machine guns, John. You can buy a Mac 11 for $350, $400 plus the $200 transfer tax." I'm not interested in that.
It's like the high point of machine guns.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, they actually work better than you'd expect, but you don't want to be seen with them.
Right. It's almost like that.
But with some of the stuff people like Richard Lage are doing,
Right. They can do.
well, it's a whole different kettle of wax.
I will relate this one
Mix all
anecdote,
that.
and you've heard it to me. I've related it before, but I don't think I've related it on camera before. Early on, when I was a much younger man, and I went to a machine gun shooting event. It wasn't an official one. It was a gravel pit, and people got together. There were two teams, and we each had our own subguns, and there was a table with bowling pins on it. Each team had to shoot off all the bowling pins on the table, so the tables were cleared. And then after all the bowling pins were off the table, then the team had to shoot a solitary bowling pin sitting on a fence post at the extreme corner of the range. One team was on the extreme left, and one team was on the extreme right. And I was the only one on that range when we were competing, and there were about 20 of us total, who had a World War II German MP40. Everybody else had Mac 10s, Mac 11s, or an HK, or an Uzi, or something like that. And my team didn't do well at knocking the pins off the table. They were blazing away, and the other team they got theirs done first. And everybody on the other team to my right, they kind of exhausted their ammunition with changing magazines, and mine had finished off their table, and I just went up, brought that MP40 up, shot a solitary round, dropped the pin. Before the event started, people were like, "Oh, why do you got that old thing? You should get something like this. It shoots fast and it's great stuff." And after the event was over, 3 different people came to me and said, "You want to sell that thing?" So I felt pretty good about that.
I imagine you did. E. Raja says, in the machine gun registry, are there more enemy machine guns than allied ones? I would think it would be easier for soldiers to bring back a captured enemy gun than a captured, so to speak, sort of liberated, bagged, yes, allied gun. Say troops find a Bren gun. Is there any attempt to bring that, to get it back to the British Army?
Great question. Great thing. Yeah, there are a lot of the countries that we fought against, and we romped through them and bagged those war souvenirs. There are a lot of those specimens out there. There are a lot of American ones out there too, simply because we made so many and they didn't get destroyed. But as far as the Allied ones, the Bren is a great thing. I better bring it up. The Bren gun remained in service with the British and the Commonwealth nations for a very long time, and they weren't released. So while other machine guns from other countries were being released as surplus and brought in and imported and registered for private ownership, the Bren gun, the only way the Bren gun kind of came in was if you made a trade during World War II or some other ways, clandestinely or smuggled one in. There were the ones that were dropped for the resistance forces to use, and you'll see those 8mm guns come in, and you'll see the ones that Interarmco brought in, and those are registered, and they're out there. But by far and large, the countries we didn't fight against, those are the more scarce ones. You don't see a whole lot of the Finnish Suomis in this country, do you?
Yeah.
You see a few PPSH 41s and 43s, but nothing like the millions that they made. You'll see the ones that we bagged during the Korean War and the Chinese ones. That
I was about to say, a lot of those are guns that came back from Korea and Vietnam.
Right, that we bagged against the bad guys, or whoever were the bad guys at the given time. But every
once in a while, you'll get one where some American soldier on the Elba traded 5 packs of cigarettes for a PPSH.
Very good friend of mine got one, and machine guns that were in a wheelbarrow being brought west from the east by Germans who said, let's go surrender to the Americans. They like to collect guns. Let's take this wheelbarrow full of guns that we got from the Russians and
possible
trade.
way to surrender to American forces is bring a whole pile of souvenir guns with you.
Absolutely true anecdote. A wheelbarrow full of guns that were captured from the Russians, brought to the West, and hey, Americans, we want to surrender, and we got some goodies for you.
Oh, that's brilliant. Jay says, do you see a chance for another machine gun amnesty? At least one directed to a certain time in history, for example, a 1945 and earlier sort of vet bring back amnesty? I imagine some families are stuck with World War II bringbacks that are NFA but were never registered, and they don't want to turn them in or destroy them for sentimental or historical reasons.
Very good question, really well put, really kind of covers it. There was a very real and quite a bit of support for a veterans amnesty some years ago. And that had quite a bit of support, and it had a reasonably good chance, but more so then than now, because at the time that was really, doing, and the groundswell of that was in the 80s and 90s, we had a significant number of World War II veterans in the Congress of the United States.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
And a number of them, some of them were pretty high profile, had guns which they brought back from the combat theaters.
And never registered?
And in one particular case, a Democratic senator from an eastern state had one, and he was addressed, "Well, Senator, do you have one of these?" "Oh, yeah, sure. So I brought it back from the war." "Did you ever register it during the amnesty?" "Don't know anything about that." "Well, you're looking at some years in prison, Senator, if you get caught with that." "Oh, come on, I bagged it fair and square." And it's like, no,
yeah.
This many years, there was some genuine support for it, but not sufficient to have it to occur. The prospects of an amnesty, I'll tell you, it could be done with in a quote, a gentle way, if you said, okay, make some very clear parameters. It's got to be 50 years old or older. It has to be perhaps the veteran or the son or descendant or daughter or descendant of a veteran. It can't be things where one of the real obstacles is you've got a bunch of people that are being prosecuted right now for having sawed-off shotguns or altered AR-15s into machine guns and things like that. If you start to say we're going to give an amnesty for it, you're going to open up the whole way for those people's attorneys to say, hey, release these people. The Justice Department and the government as a whole says, no, those are bad people. One of the easy slam dunks is if you got someone who's a hardened drug dealer who has something kind of a firearm they shouldn't have, they can't necessarily get them on the drug charge too easily, but they can absolutely, it's a slam dunk easy one if they got an altered AR-15 that shoots full auto.
That is the whole reason the NFA exists in the first place. Ultimately, what would solve this problem is allowing unregistered guns to become registered. And I think perhaps amnesty is not the wisest term to use for that in a political sense. It has insinuations, and it just sounds, it kind of implies that there is something wrong being done and we're just going to ignore it.
Right.
When in reality, even in Europe, where the regulations are generally a lot stricter than they are here, it's bafflingly weird to them that there's not some way that you could take an unregistered gun and register it. The whole point of registration, allegedly, would be to know where the guns are.
If the goal is for the orderly and legal transfer of fully automatic weapons between people who have been vetted as being able to own them and keep them and responsibly collect them, then it would make sense, if you were to turn back the clock a certain number of years, to be able to say, I found a light machine gun OA-15 aircraft gun off a Fokker DR-3 or an Albatross in my attic that my great-grandfather brought back from World War I. Wouldn't it be appropriate if that person could fill out the appropriate form and fingerprints and photographs and submit it in and say, I'd like to have this gun registered? Wouldn't it be appropriate to have that be a process to be possible? If the person wasn't eligible, they could deny it. They could be denied, but otherwise, save that historic machine gun, allow it to be displayed.
It's a gun the person's allowed to own if it's registered. What's the difference?
Right.
So.
And if you're worried about local laws, the states have the ability to make more stringent regulations. If you're in Iowa and Iowa doesn't think people should own machine guns, then they don't. You can't have a Schnellfeuer in Iowa, unfortunately, for the people who live in Iowa who might like to have one.
Yeah. Tyler says, does the rise of binary and reactive triggers affect the value of NFA registered machine guns?
I've seen no such indication of saying. The people who would buy machine guns are not the same people who want to purchase binary triggers.
Yeah, I think there's a price, there's a wallet potential, or a wallet limitation here.
There's a financial resource limitation.
And I think people who are buying a registered machine gun are never doing it just because, unless they've got a ton of money, they're not doing it just because they want to dump ammo fast for the sake of dumping ammo fast. They're doing it because there is a historical value to the gun that they want to buy.
There are three categories of would-be machine gun. One is the historic and the most fervent and passionate and numerous one is the historical machine gun enthusiast who's got a historical reason or a mechanical reason or something like that. The second one would be the investor who says, ooh, machine guns have gone up this much percentage over time. This is a great place to put my money in an uncertain economy. And the third is, I want to spray bullets about in long range, and I want the louder, the larger magazine capacity. Those people would love the Russian guns. They're always loud. They're always loud. They're always make a noise, and that's their thing.
Okay. So yeah, that's different Venn diagram with not a lot of overlap between those two. All right, we are back, and I am. Hold on.
I'm ready for another one.
I'm out of scotch, so let's fix that. The fight in Hotel China.
Yeah.
Here. All right. Our next question is from Timo, who says, "What machine gun were you most surprised to see sell in the U.S. or to see come into the auction company? Like, what was there that you didn't think actually existed?"
There was one of the German the pre-World War II 1936 era experimental machine gun that came in 2008, I think it was. And it was really, I said, I didn't even know that was around. Every so often, something that I consider to be really rare, or wow, I'm really glad we have the opportunity, to have this come in, surfaces and comes in. A Villa Perosa is one of those. I mean, there are so few of those, and they're so much fun.
They're very interesting guns. I'm really thrilled that we had the chance to shoot the one here.
That was, I really got to thank the consignor for bringing that to us. We did well for the consignor, and the buyer really, really was happy to get it, and I was very happy to be able to take it out to the range. Yeah,
boy, we got to shoot it, and
I think we got Matthias in May on that one too.
We invited CN Arsenal down. I knew they were looking for that, and I figured they're not going to have another chance to shoot one of these things. So let's all get together and have some fun with it.
I really want to take this opportunity to thank all the people who've interacted with me, both as consignors and buyers. I'm retired from the Army, but I'm doing my hobby as a profession, and I really enjoy being able to help both the consignor and the buyer. And you guys and gals, because there are some very astute and passionate female collectors, to include female machine gun collectors out there. You guys and gals make this what it is.
It really is all about the people, ultimately. It has to be. We have 2 questions left. The next one is Alan, who says, how does the availability of spare parts, belts, and or magazines affect the collectability of different machine guns?
Tremendously. And I'll give you an example. If you've got a ZK-383 machine gun, you've got one of the very highly sought after submachine guns, very collectible. Might be at near the top of the list of that World War II era machine gun that people want to have. However, the magazines for same are in very short supply. I'll give you another one example. The 45 ACP.
You beat me to it.
MG34. Ooh, there are more guns, and there aren't very many guns in the United States in that model, Chamberlain 45 ACP, than there are magazines.
Yeah, more guns than mags.
More guns than magazines. If you paid attention to the auction catalog where I talk about that gun we sold recently, I outline exactly how many guns were imported and how many magazines were imported, and there weren't enough magazines for the gun.
Do you see that impacting things like prices or desirability, or does it just mean the people who get those guns become like paranoid, protective about their spare parts and their magazines?
Well, let me put it this way. The last magazine, we had some Type 96 Japanese machine gun magazines which we sold separate from guns that came back with a veteran, World War II. He brought back a gun that was unregistered as well, and he threw that in the lake many years ago. But he had a bunch of magazines, which his son inherited, and then we carried them to auction. And those magazines were bringing anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 a piece.
Jeez.
Now, if I offer a Japanese Type 96 machine gun, and it has no magazine, the person who buys it either has magazines, or if they want to have the gun, they're going to think, how much am I going to have to pay to get a magazine? Well, I'm going to have to pay, if I have to pay $1,500 or $2,000 for a magazine, I'm going to pay $1,500 or $2,000 less than I otherwise would for the identical specimen with a magazine. So does it have an impact? To the insightful thinking collector who doesn't have those parts already, yes. Does it make the person who has multiple magazines protective of those?
Yeah, I bet it does.
Absolutely. If I've got somebody who's got, let's say, one of the great unicorns of the, I'll use the Japanese, if I've got somebody who's got a Japanese Type 91 tank machine gun hopper, assembling all the parts to convert it over, and they want magazines for a Japanese Type 96 machine gun, that's a trade that can be had.
Yeah.
You know, kind of a thing. If you don't have the magazine for your Jap Type 96, you want one.
And that may actually contribute to some of the popularity and the elevated prices of things like German guns, because it is not hard at all to find MG34 or MG42 parts. There's a lot of those parts out there.
But they still bring very good money
right.
when you're authentic original. There's a lot of fakery going on. There's a lot of forced matching going on, and attempted fakery going on of things like saddle drum top covers and Panzer mantles for the MG34 tank gun and things like that. But you make a really, really good point. In general, well, the Germans made 10 or 20 or 30 times as many machine guns as the Japanese did. And if you can get the magazines for the MP34O and 9mm Parabellum much easier than you get the Jap Type 100 submachine guns, there's going to be a lot more
and I wonder, like, what would the value, what kind of prices would an MG34 bring, knowing, as we just discussed, how finicky it can be about matching bolts and barrels together, if you couldn't just go and buy a new bolt on a whim? If you had to go searching for an MG34 bolt the way you have to search for a Type 96 magazine, I bet that would actually significantly decrease the value of that MG34.
And I am old enough to remember the time when it was difficult. Before Gunbroker, before eBay, and eBay used to sell machine gun parts.
Yep.
Before those times, and this is a very good segue into something. There was a time when the people like Dolph Goldsmith and others, who I don't have permission to use their name, but others, and you know who they are and who they are still, who were the kingpins of the machine gun collecting genre. And they knew where the guns were, they knew where the parts were. And they could make themselves a very nice living and create a very wonderful network of connections for supplying the guns and the parts for the people who are doing that. Dolph has said to me, and he wouldn't mind me saying so in this audience, that when he sold his collection off years ago to the Evergreen Aviation Museum, he expected he was going to be able to take the money, take some of the money and invest it, take other of the money, and go out and reacquire the various machine guns he had just sold. But when he went to go do that, because he knew where all the guns were, when he went to go call the people, he'd found, oh, I sold that. Oh, I had sold that. I don't have that anymore. What has happened was the rise in the popularity of machine guns had occurred so that he couldn't reacquire those models. He had sold. It used to be that those people with the connections and knew where the guns were the kingpins. That still is there. There are still key critical people, and you know who you are, who know where the guns are and can broker those things privately and do very well. But what has really happened is the power of the internet, digital photography, this very channel that we're on right now, has made it so that you don't need those people to reach your audience of collecting people anymore. You don't need Dolph Coltsmith to tell you where that fine Vickers machine gun is, because Morphy's Auctions is going to have it.
And you can talk to all the people on the discussion forums. The people you used to have to meet through shoots or gun shows, and then it's difficult to communicate with them maybe on the spur of the moment. Now they're all on the internet, and well, not all of them. Some of them are very old people who don't internet.
There are still a few who know the right people. I'm one of them. Who know the right people, who know where the stuff is and know where the parts are, and the people who don't do internet. They don't. And the collectors who don't look at Gunbroker, and they don't look at the forums. What they do is they call up John Keene and they say, I'm looking for an MKB-42. Do you know where there's one? And how soon will you be able to think you're going to be able to bring them to auction? Or something like that. Or what machine guns do I not have? What am I missing from my museum, Ian? Can you help me find those?
Only if it's French. And then no, because I want it myself.
Right. And then once you get it, then you'll help me.
All right. Our very last question is from Fruitbat. Says the M60 machine gun has a bad reputation in some circles. What's your take on it?
Wow, what a great question for a retired master sergeant with 28 years in the Army, over 28 years.
I should preface that. Did you ever use the M60 in service?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Absolutely. I was in service between 1986 and 2014. And I was in combat zone for 15 months. And I definitely carried what we called the pig on a number of occasions. And I will give you my take on the M60. The M60 combines a couple of designs, and I know you've talked about that on your channel already, and I won't go into that. A couple of designs that were really good designs, but we fell short of what we could have done. I found a great shortcoming in an M60 in that you can turn the gas thing around, and it fires single shot. No need for that. We could have designed it in such a way that it could only go in one way. Great action, really. Interchangeable and easy change barrels, fantastic. Great thing. Caliber, effective. Ammunition, great. I have no problem with that. My experience with the M60 was, depending on the mission to which you were assigned, I would absolutely bring it with me if I needed that kind of firepower. But there were other kinds of missions where I would leave that sucker in the supply room, because I found, especially during the latter part of my career, that the M249 saw would do everything that I needed the M60 to do when I was doing light movement type techniques. When I was on convoys, and we did that in Iraq, I really loved having the Strikers and the 2nd Division with their M240s with me. And if I could somehow get a Mag 58 or something like that, yeah. And there was even a time where we didn't have as many 50 caliber machine guns as we wanted to, and I went out into the Iraqi supply point and almost got in trouble doing this, but got a Dishka and then set it up, and we put that on the back gate for a while, and then they said, we're going to take that down because that gives the wrong impression to the locals. And we don't want to give the impression, because that's what the the Saddam Hussein guys had. So we ended up taking that one that I put together and gave it to the Iraqi National Guard. And they used use that. But it was, it definitely was a deterrent for people who might want to crash our back gate on our thing, and we didn't have as many 50 cals as we wanted. But I guess the question, my take on the M60 machine gun is, we could have done better, but I was very happy to have it. I was very happy to have it available when we had it.
It seems like the form factor of the gun is good. It is compact, it is light for the firepower that it delivers, but it seems like a lot of the shortcomings are, they're based on the fact that it's a gun with a lifespan, much like an MG42.
We did that on purpose. We did it on purpose, just like we did that on purpose with our vehicles, our Humvees. If the enemy captures our Humvees, it has a limited lifespan. Without the spare parts, it then becomes useless to the enemy. I don't know if that was intentional with the M60 or not.
I kind of hope not.
I hope not. We certainly could have done better than we did. And in my opinion, we have other designs out there right now. I'll make a plug, and I don't mind saying it. Knight's Armament has got about the best.
That light assault machine gun.
That light assault machine gun.
Oh baby, that thing is nice.
If we as the American military don't buy into that, and we let the other guys in the world get into that, we're missing the boat. And we're doing it only because we have this thing to keep our legacy stuff going on and keep American industry going on. But if you set aside your pride and say, what's in the best interest of our fighting soldiers, do a competition and do a real one where it's not, skewed.
I don't know about setting aside national pride. We're currently using a Belgian saw and a Belgian 308 machine gun.
It's not about national pride. It's about supporting the industrial, military and complex infrastructure within the United States.
No.
That's what it's really about. And when you've got all these thousands of this and thousands of that already in the inventory, and you've got the armorer and the spare parts and all this stuff to support it, when you start talking about, well, we're going to now change this other thing.
It is a very expensive.
Are we going to just discard all that stuff
Yeah,
that we had there?
I'll take them. I will take care of the expense of having to get rid of all those MG40s.
I've had enough drink to say that
It's working.
that we could do better in our long, and I'll say this, I don't mind telling this in front of everybody and the hundreds or thousands of people who see this. We in America need to do better in our long-term thinking as opposed to short-term gain. And I'm willing to do it. I am absolutely willing to take a look at the long-term game, and I'll leave this scenario with a little anecdote. My young son, back when he was 6, 7 years old, and we went for a walk. We went out into the woods behind our place, and we came back and we walked along some railroad tracks near my residence. And we're walking, and my son Dimitri is saying, "Oh, look at those rails, Papa." Yeah. Hey, they got the dates in which they were made. They were, part of the casting right into them. He said, "Papa, why is it that the rails that were made in the 50s and the 60s are in better condition than the ones that were made in the 1980s and 1990s?"
Ooh, ouch.
And I said, because in those years, we were making things and casting things with the idea of having a greater longevity, and so we wouldn't have to spend the money on the maintenance to replace them. But something changed, and American industry and thinking went to, we're better off to make something that will wear out so that we can sell it again to the consumer and make the money again on the consumer, as opposed to making something that is going to be long-term in good condition for 50 and 60 years. And that is a core problem, in my opinion, with the United States of America. It's give it to me now And I'm not worried about 20, 30, 40, 50 years. If it's good, or if I'm a CEO of a company and I'm going to be collecting forest and collecting trees to make into paper, I want to show a profit during my period as the CEO, and I'm not worried about the next CEO, so I'll take those trees that should have been left to grow for 5 more years and I'll make those into paper and I'll show a great profit this year and next year. And let the CEO who's coming after me after I retire worry about the fact that I already took those trees and he can't make the profit.
That's the problem for future me. Wouldn't want to be that guy.
Right. And that's not me. And that's it.
All right. That has been, I think, a slightly longer than normal Q&A, but I think a really fantastic one.
Yeah, and I really got to say, I enjoy it, fielding the questions from you, the public. I really like the fact that I can convey the information, and I like working with, I really enjoy working with Ian. Ian and I have some great conversations off camera.
It's fun.
And if you've submitted a question and we didn't answer it, it's probably because it was a little bit too touchy.
We left some of the legal side questions out. I'm gonna find a good gun rights lawyer. We're gonna do a legal Q&A to cover some of those elements instead.
Right.
There is, of course, a Morphe's auction coming up that I am here filming for, so you'll be seeing a bunch of content from that. We're going to go out on the range tomorrow, actually, which will be 2 weeks ago, probably, by the time you see this. One of the fantastic things that I'm able to do here, thanks to John's expertise, is actually take a bunch of their stuff out on the range and try it out for you guys. So we'll be doing some of that, and then there will be another auction in the spring. And I'll be back down here, and I expect we'll do another Q&A with John this spring.
One of the things that I really like is if you're worried about whether a gun runs well or not, we can actually demonstrate it on the range.
Yep.
We have a guarantee of our descriptions. They'll be as written in the catalog and writing, and they won't have a major departure, have a major effect on value. We don't warranty the shootability of any firearm. But if you see our video on range and the gun's going pop, 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 we did exceptionally well with a show years ago. Remember that?
People often ask, like, oh, does your video make the value, increase the price of a gun at auction? And my answer is generally, no, it doesn't. It brings an audience to the auction house, and they'll look at stuff, and eventually a percentage of you guys who are watching some of that will turn into customers for the auction house. But that show shot is a clear-cut example of where the video that we did basically doubled the sales price of that gun.
We fired 100 rounds out of that show without a single stoppage or a single problem. It was also formerly owned by Dolph Goldsmith.
Right. It was a good gun, and we knew it was a good gun going in.
But we dispelled the myth.
Yeah, I think so.
About saying, oh, the 8mm show doesn't run well.
And you said the person who bought that gun wanted a gun that was proper and was going to work. And they saw that one, and they're like, that one works. I don't want to have to look for another one. And there were obviously at least one other person who had the same feeling, because it takes two to bid a gun up.
Hey, I want a show and I want to know it runs. And boy, if that wasn't proof that gun ran, and it was a good show in good condition, and you say, we got double the money for it. So there is a genuine advantage to it. And Ian and I have a great time. I want to thank you all for allowing me to and thank you, Ian, for bringing me in to do this interview. I really enjoy expanding the expertise. I have a tremendous passion and happiness for this genre, and I love helping people in the same way.
I think that's pretty clearly evident at this point. So, I think we should wrap this up. Turn off that cell phone that has been going off for the last 20 minutes. Sorry about that.
Sure.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. We will be back again with John Keene in a few months. And until then, thanks for watching.
Have a good one.